Back in the 1960s, Chicago turned the art world on its head.
The sculpture by Picasso, I think, marks the beginning of an era.
Chicago would be the first city in America to display abstract sculpture in the city center.
People asked, has Chicago scooped New York?
It was part of Mayor Richard J. Daley's vision for downtown. It was the handiwork of the brilliant and unconventional Pablo Picasso.
You know, he was a communist, an avowed communist.
It was a marriage of art and industry.
Picasso might be a great artist, but I tell you, he ain't no welder.
It was bold, unapologetic, and in that sense, every ounce Chicago. Pablo and the Boss, the amazing story of Chicago's Picasso. Next on Chicago Stories. The amazing story of Chicago's Picasso. The 1960s were about change, social, political, cultural. Change would also affect the art world, specifically public art, where little had varied for years.
Up until 1967.
Mayor Daley said, if you gentlemen think he's the greatest, that's what we want for Chicago, and you go ahead.
While the mayor's quick assent was an act of great political self-assurance, it may also have had more to do with Daley's faith in his advisor.
I believe that Mayor Daley accepted the idea of the Picasso to a large extent because he trusted Bill Hartman.
He was forewarned about all these other negatives of Picasso, but if he was the top man, we should have him.
The question then became how to approach the artist. Picasso was already in his 80s, living a life of seclusion in the south of France. He was not one to schedule appointments. Once again, Hartman came forward. He offered to reach Picasso through the artist's biographer and friend, Roland Penrose. In May of 1963, Hartman, Penrose, and two other architects converged on a little town near the French Riviera in an attempt to drop in on Picasso. Penrose made a quick phone call, and soon all were heading up a long dirt road. Awaiting them was a small, balding man in checked pants and an old sweater. One of the architects asked, "Who's that?" Another, Norman Schlossman, replied, "That's him." Schlossman recalled his impressions of Picasso that day in a letter back home.
You never saw such a bundle of vitality, fitness, and agility. About 5 feet 1 inch tall, with sparkling eyes that dart everywhere at once.
Hartman had come prepared with photographs, drawings, and a model of the Civic Center. Schlossman's letter describes how the meeting with Picasso began.
He knew the purpose of our visit, of course, and Bill quickly started the presentation, very informally, with all of us seated or standing around a small table.
Hartman's entire presentation was built around a key piece of information. Picasso probably had no feelings for Chicago. He'd never even set foot in America. But Picasso did have a dream of completing a work of monumental sculpture. Hartman knew that and would offer him the chance.
They described to him that he had this plaza to use and he could design it in any way that he felt suited his sculptural idea. And scale was an issue they talked about, and Picasso took out his cigarette lighter and placed it on the plaza and said, "Does this seem about right?"
Picasso might be a great artist, but I tell you, he ain't no welder.
The statue was finished in June 1967 and trucked from Gary to Chicago. It made the trip in pieces to squeeze under the L tracks in the loop and under the cover of darkness to limit traffic congestion along the route. Soon the Steel Maiden began to rise from the ground again, this time in her new home. Workmen put a huge cloth gown around her to shield the sculpture from view. Hartman and the city worked hard to avoid publicity during the construction process. They felt that any early exposure would only encourage naysayers. Still, there were plenty of comments that were less than